This morning, as I said, we are going to be in the back half of chapter 11. I'm going to read it for you before we get started. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body. For youth and the dawn of life are vanity. Verse 12, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain. This is the word of God. Some of you, this will be easier than others, but do you remember what it's like to be young? Yeah. Some people are like, oh, we're so far back. Remember like when you were young and you had the whole world ahead of you and you're starting to get into those teen years where you like started to get a taste of freedom and getting to do what you want and when you want. You know, I remember one of my highlight moments for me of that is first time I got my driver's license. I was about 17 because it took me like a year and a half because I failed my written 5 times. And apparently my other one, I failed a couple times because apparently in Washington you have to actually come to a full stop at the stop sign. Who knew? So I finally get it, and my dad gives me the keys to his car, and he says, it's yours. And he gave me his 1971 Chevelle Malibu. Yeah, 8 cylinders, 375 in it, you know, and this is the color that it was, which not everybody loves green, but it was nice. I took it out the first night, and my dad washed it every week. I swear it could be 20 degrees outside, and he would have washed it. And so it was clean, it was crisp, and so that first summer night, I remember taking it out, and I rolled down the windows, you know, and I turned up my music, and I turned up the bass extra loud. Do you remember doing that when you were in high school? Because it made you feel like you were extra cool, you know? And then I turned my hat around backwards, and I put on my sunglasses, even though it was nighttime, because once again, I thought it made me look cool. I'll admit it. And then some of you who really had identity issues, you'd be like me, and I would drive with one wheel, and I kind of leaned to the left side, because once again, thought it made me look cool. So I could like lean out, you know, wave at people as they go by. It was like, I felt like, man, I was like king of the world. I could do anything. I could go anywhere, except I had no money, but I felt like I could go anywhere and do anything. Of course, it all came crashing down on that very first night, I dented my dad's right fender. Yeah, it was bad. And then I remember him asking, he goes, how did you dent the fender? And I said, well, remember, you know when you turn out a carport and there's those big posts that hold up the ceiling? Well, apparently you have to back out far enough before you start turning. I would tell you how he responded, but that's for another sermon. Dealing with anger. My point is, in these moments where we're growing up and we get to do these things that we've never done before, there's this sense of excitement and this sense of freedom of what life it's going to bring. And so Solomon, and he says in verses 9, he's saying, look, enjoy this time. Enjoy these moments. You know, follow your heart. Follow your heart. Take some risks in life. Go have some adventures. Go explore life. Get out there. Youth is meant to be fun. It's that old phrase Nike used to say, just put on your shoe, tie up your Nike shoes, and just do it. Go for it. But just then, as you're lacing up those Nike shoes, getting ready to do it, he says in verse 10, or the rest of verse 9, he says, but know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. Talk about a joy kill. What he's saying, though, in other words, go out. You have this incredible gift called youth. That is, and he says it's vanity, futility, which means, remember when we talked about this very first week, it's like a candle being blown out. It's there and then it's gone. As those who are getting older know. It goes quickly. He says, as you live this out, God is going to assess how you live your life. He's going to assess what you choose to do with that youth. And I'm going to talk about that more in a moment, but I want to talk, as I was working on this, I want to stop and talk to the parents for a moment. Because no one has more influence over young people than their parents. Now, you have other people who have influence in your life as well, but nothing like parents. And to all of our parents that are listening or here, the question is, what are you going to do with that time you have been given? What are you going to do with that time you've been given to influence them? Now, some parents, they don't ever think about this. They just go day in and out from activity to activity, doing what other kids seem to be doing, without ever having a bigger picture for how they're raising their child or their teen. I mean, if I were to ask you, what vision do you have for your child? What vision do you have for raising your son, your daughter, your kids? Do you have one? And this transfers even to when they're adults and out of the house, because you still have influence, probably not as much as you would like, but what is your vision for how you pour into their lives? Do you have a plan? Do you have anywhere you're trying to go with them? Or are you just going day in and day out? In Deuteronomy, we're given a vision for what our time with our children should look like. It says in Deuteronomy 11, when talking about the teachings of God, that you shall teach them to your children, talking of them when you're sitting in your home, when you're walking along the road, when you lie down, and when you rise. In other words, the Bible says that your vision for your children, for your teens, for your young adults that are your kids, are to show them what it means to love and serve the Lord. And it's a vision that's all echoed throughout the New Testament. Now, not only just ignoring or not thinking about this, but another mistake that parents make is they see that their goal in their lives is to protect their children. Their job is to protect their children, to protect them from everything bad. We spend time as parents telling our kids not what to do, what is bad about the world, and we forget to balance that out with teaching them about how to live and how to move forward in life. And we do this because we don't want to see our kids get hurt, right? I mean, who wants to see our kid get hurt? If anything, we want to find the people who hurt our kid and make them hurt. I mean, when I remember the first time my daughter told me someone was being mean to her on the bus, I wanted to go grab that kindergartner and take him out behind the bus. You know? I ain't going to lie. The feelings were there. But the truth is we can't protect our children. There is only so much we can do in this world to protect them. And there comes a point where we're unable to do that. And if that was our goal in life, was to protect them, if that is all that we gave them growing up, then it's not something that will carry with them through life. Rather, Scripture gives us this attitude that says to our kids, not, you got to be afraid of everything, or I got to be there to double check everything, or if I don't agree with it, or I'm not excited about it, then you shouldn't take a risk, especially when they get older. It's an attitude that says, look, you were created by God. You have incredible gifts and talents that God has given you. He has huge plans for you. And sometimes it's going to be great, and sometimes it's going to be tough. And what my job as a parent is to show you how to live through all of that, so you can grasp all that He has for you. Your job as a parent is not to protect your children, it is to teach them how to live in this world. How do we do this? One of the great phrases I've read in the past has said, one of our great jobs as parents is to teach children to love. Listen to this. To love the boundaries of God. To love the boundaries of God. Some of you have grown up, and the Bible, all the Bible is to you is a list of do's and don'ts. Check boxes. That's it. You check them to stay out of trouble, and so God will give you, gold stickers in life and bless you. But that's not the purpose of the Bible. The purpose of the Bible is to show us who God is, to show us who we are, and how we can find the most fulfillment and purpose in this world. And this is why the biblical narrative is so critical in our lives. It tells us about God through Jesus Christ. and who we're destined to be because of His grace and love. It gives us a bearing in our lives. It fixing our location and lighting the road ahead. Provides us with rules for the journey that will keep us from danger. And it shows us story after story of people who have made it so we can both be warned and both be encouraged. The Bible, it's a divinely inspired map that represents the most precious gifts that God has given us. Psalm 19 says, the precepts of the Lord are right. Listen to this, giving joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are radiant, giving light to the eyes. If we don't read the Bible and find joy in it, we're not reading it correctly. There's something that we're missing, something that wasn't handed down to us. And I know that many of you as parents, whether your kids are in their 20s or their teens or their children, you probably sometimes feel like I do. I feel inept at teaching my kids those ways. I'm like, I don't know what to do with this book, how I communicate it to their lives. But like we talked about last week, to be a parent and to influence other children, it doesn't require a master's or PhD. If it did, there would be very few parents in this world. The key is you learning to love the boundaries of God yourself. You learn to love the boundaries of God yourself. You don't understand why God puts certain rules in, and so it's hard for you to teach it. You remember when you're children, or even if you haven't had kids, you've been around children and they get into the why stage? Why? 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 I read a joke once. It's ironic that we spend all our time when our children are toddlers explaining to them why they shouldn't do something. And then once they're teenagers, we just yell at them because we said so. What happens is when we learn to love the boundaries of God and we understand why He puts His precepts and His teachings in there and we practice them out in our lives, then they just naturally flow out of our lives into other people. If you were explaining your job to your child, you would not feel inept in that. You'd be like, well, this is what I do, and I do this, and I do that. And in the same way, as you get to know God's Word more in your life and the words of Christ, then you're just able to naturally share them. And let me tell you, they need them. They need them. I'll give you one example. I was reading this I was reading this article, and this man, he had interviewed 3 young ladies who got into the pornography industry. And he was asking them, why would you choose this? And I'm sure there were multiple reasons, but one thing each of them said, which stood out to me, is that nobody ever taught them about sex. They just said, don't do this. One lady, I was at church, and she goes, I just had to sign a card that I wouldn't have sex until I got married, and then that was it. And the other 2, they were like, my parents, they never talked to me. They just told me not to do it. But why would parents tell you not to do it? It's a good reason, good thing to tell your kid not to do. It's to protect them. But said, no, our role is better than that. We have to teach them how to live. Why does God say, do not have sex until you get married? Why does He tell us that? We have to go beyond just setting rules for our children and teaching them how to live. So when they get that sense of freedom and they have the freedom to follow that heart, to follow their eyes, we will have given them the boundaries of life that will help make that time for them the most exciting and fulfilling. You guys with me? And let me tell you, it's scary. Like even on this sex thing, I had to sit down with my son. Oh man, I didn't ask him if I could tell you this. He'd probably be mortified. And I had never had this conversation because I never had a kid before, and so I got these cool books off Amazon, which were incredibly helpful. But I'm sitting there trying to explain this to him, and I'm like, I just felt horrible. Anybody you've ever had this conversation, you know exactly how I felt. But ever since that, I opened up a door with him and a dialogue with him, and now every once in a while I say, hey, we'll see something on TV, and I'll say, what do you think about that? And we're able to have that talk and that dialogue. And I'm noticing that as I guided him through that, even though I stumbled all over my words doing it, he's now learning how to view sexuality. And this goes for all the areas of life, money and decision making. We are to be that light for them to help them to love those boundaries of God and see why they're important and a guide for His life. You guys with me? That's why the church is so important too. Right now, we have people that are not sitting in here. They've been prepping all week. You know what they're in there doing? They're not entertaining your children. They're not babysitting. They're teaching them the precepts of God and who God is, so that as they move older, they'll know the way to move in this world that God has called them to. But it's up to you, parents. The church is a support role. It's not the main role that you are. That's why it's so important that your life, understand who God is. And sometimes their parents are not in that role, so grandparents, you got to pop in there. You got to roll in there with God's truth and His love. And then sometimes you can be a neighbor to somebody, and you know a kid doesn't have a great family life, and you'll speak truth and encouragement to them. We must help our youth so that when they get that freedom, they can avoid all the mistakes that we made. No more, they can figure out who God has called them to be. All right, let's jump back to our text. Back to the youth, he says, in verse 10, he says, remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity, which means it's going to go quickly. Vexation means anxiety. So he's talking about when you're young, learn how to trust God. When you're young, put away pain from your body. And that pain, in the Hebrew, it's for evil. It means a way, take the things that you're tempted in, the places that you sin and struggle, and take care of them now. Take care of them now. Don't wait. And there's an action there. You have a role to play. Parents, you can pour stuff into your kids, but at the end of the day, they have to make the decision. I wish they didn't. I wish we could just force them to do the right thing, but we can't. They have to make that decision. And listen, I want to be clear to you, some of you. Some of us, we're like, we're in our 30s maybe, or we're in our 40s, in our 50s, and we don't feel like maybe we're so young anymore. But listen, what's the average age of life right now? It's 78.6 right now in the U.S. So, if you're in your 20s, you got 60 years left on average. If you're in your 30s, you got 50. In your 40s, you got 40. If you're 60s, you got 20. Your 70s, you're getting closer, but you still got time. The point is, take care of these things now. Yeah. If you're in your late 80s or mid 80s, you're just riding on borrowed time, so just enjoy it. Take care of this stuff now. Take care of it now. Now, how do you do this? He says this in verse 12:1. He says, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth. And this idea of remembering, in the Hebrew, it means to look at, to focus, to know who somebody is. Okay? Figure out who God is. You know something I have come across recently that was new to me? I have never come across this before. I'm only 41. Sorry, my birthday was yesterday. I should remember this. 41. And but recently, in the last couple of years, I've come across teenagers. For the first time, they don't care to know who God is. I'm like, don't you want to figure out who your Creator is and where you come from? No. Even when I was in youth ministry and I was younger, people would be like, well, yeah, I should probably figure it. But now I keep running into people young people, they don't care. They're like, whatever. It'd be like, you're asking them to go watch a movie, and they're like, yeah, I could pass. And it's heartbreaking. And some of you who are younger, you might feel like that way. I remember when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I got to figure out this God stuff later. But Solomon says, don't wait. Don't make that mistake. Jeremiah 17:9 says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? If this is true, young people, how can you trust yourself to come back later in life? And you think, I'll figure out later when I'm married or I have kids. No, trust it. You got to figure out now. You got to figure out who your Creator is now. Not later, now. Now when you're choosing who you're going to date and who you're going to marry, choosing where you're going to go to college, choosing what kind of job that you are going to pursue, choosing all these decisions that will to affect you for the rest of your life, you got to figure out who your Creator is now. Because the decisions you make will last for decades. As one wise gentleman said the other night in our men's Bible study, you can't go backwards. You can't go backwards. So you got to prepare your path now. Pastor Matt Chandler says, deal with your junk now while you're young because it's only going to get worse as it gets older. Now, this importance of focusing on God. It's not just important because of the decisions you're going to make that's going to influence the rest of your life, but also because it's going to be an anchor for you when troubled days come. Ecclesiastes 1, verse 12, the back half of 1, he says, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. He said, listen, days are going to come where stuff ain't going to go your way. You are going to deal with death. You are going to deal with tragedy. You are going to deal with financial loss. And if you don't know to look at God now, it is going to be so easy for you to forget to look at Him then. How many people do you know who ignore God or don't look to God because something bad happened in their life and I'm like, I don't want nothing to do with them? I've only ever seen this happen because it was somebody whose eyes were not really on Him in the first place. And then in verses 3 through 5, Solomon says, look, even if bad things don't come your way, you have this glorious, awesome life and just doves and pigeons and just the rainbows all over your house and everything is happy and hunky-dory. You're like Mr. Rogers' neighborhood your entire life. Old age is still coming. And he gives us some colorful sorry, I was laughing when I read these, colorful illustrations. Okay? Some of you can feel free to amen at this because you're going through it. He says, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble, when your arms and your hands tremble, and the strong men are bent, when your legs and your knees and your shoulders weaken, and you walk bent over. And the grinders cease because they are few. Anybody know what the grinder might be? Your teeth. And those who look through the window are dimmed. Your vision begins to deteriorate. And the doors of the street are shut. When the sound of the grinding is low, your hearing begins to fade. And one rises up at the sound of a bird, which means you wake up early and you can't go back to sleep. I know some of you feel that one. And when all the daughters of the song are brought low, that your voice is not what it once was. When they are afraid, also of what is high, and the terrors are in the way. When we become old, filled with fear, and timid because our mind begins to go. And the almond tree blossoms, which means your hair turns white, which fortunately for some of you, you will not have to experience. Nor will I, eventually. It says, and the grasshopper drags itself along and desire fails. Grasshoppers, talk about grasshoppers, they normally like to jump in the air, but he's so old, he just drags. You ever feel like some of you feel like you just get up and you're just dragging? You're like, I feel like that way now. It only gets worse. This is the future we all have to look forward to. Praise the Lord. All right, okay, we need some humor. You know you're getting old when everything that works hurts and what doesn't hurt doesn't work. You know you're getting old when your knees buckle but your belt won't. When your back goes out more than you do. When you sink your teeth into a steak and they stay there. When you try to straighten out the wrinkles in your socks and you discover you're not wearing any. And your idea of weightlifting is standing up. Yes, amen. Amen. This is our future. I remember last year, I turned 40, and I turned to somebody who was in my 70s, and he was in his 70s, and I said, man, this getting older thing is weird. I can't drink all I want before bed now and not have to get up twice to go to sleep. And he just chuckled, and he looked at me, and he's like, oh, you ain't seen nothing yet. He's like, you only get up twice? See, our bodies are going to get weaker. You're going to start to notice that things don't start to work like they used to. Your minds will start to get foggier. Eventually, you will lose the freedoms. You won't be able to go and do things that you wanted to do that you used to be able to do on your own, like lift and move things. At some point, you'll watch your driver's license be taken away from you. The question is, in those days, how are you going to respond in those twilight years? The question is, as your body gets weaker, the thing I want you to ponder is your spirit going to get stronger? Will it get stronger? Will your spirit become strong enough that when your body becomes weak? And the reason that I ask this question now is because now is when you start strengthening yourself for when those days come. Have you ever come across people in their yonder years? I don't know, what's the right way to say that? I always feel like I'm going to offend somebody. Those who are closer to going home and seeing Jesus. Okay. Or hope they might be going closer. You're really not sure by the way they behave. Have you ever come across those people that are just, when they get older, that they're grumpy? You know, they just complain about everything that they don't like. Husbands, do not elbow your wives right now. I didn't see anybody do it. I was just trying to pre-warn any men for being stupid. They're full of fear in life. You don't like being around them. When you see them coming your way, you're like, oh. You probably have them in your family. If we don't take care of our junk now, if we don't look to God now and make sure that our life is anchored in who He says we are, in His promise of eternity, in the death and resurrection of His Son, we should be very afraid who we're going to grow up to be. Because our weaknesses and our shortcomings, they only get magnified when we get older. Because we get to a point where the filter falls off and we don't care. We should be very afraid of who we could end up being. But at a young age, when the Spirit of God gets a hold of us and we start figuring out who He is and His love and His grace and what it means for us, and we start living out the boundaries of life that He has given us, and we see what a blessing and a joy that they are, it strengthens the spirit to the point that when everything else starts to fail, our spirit gets stronger. As Paul says in 2 Corinthians, that we do not lose heart. That though the outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. I have come across people in my life working in the church where their body is just literally falling apart. If I was in their place, I would be grumpy, angry, I would be a nasty person, and they still have a smile on their face. I remember visiting one man as he was dying of a painful disease. I'd sit there with him, and I'd get hurt, and then he would chuckle. And I go, why are you laughing? He goes, I'm laughing because I ain't going to have to feel that pain much longer. In fact, let me tell you what that man did. I'm very work-driven. I guess a lot of us men are. And when I started out in ministry, I'd go to work and I'd plow through all day because just in ministry, you never feel like you can get caught up. And he taught me something. He taught me the importance of going home and having lunch with my wife and my family. And so as I got to minister to him in those last days of his life, ever since, for the last 14 of my 16 years of marriage, I've gone home every day, most every day, to go see my wife and have lunch with my kids. The only reason that he was able to change my life like that is because his spirit was strengthened in Jesus. He knew who God was, what God had done for him. He knew who he was loved by God, and he'd be going to see his Maker. And because he was in that place, he changed my marriage. I pray that you, every one of you won't wait. You won't wait. Whatever age you're at now, you will start figuring out, even more than you are now, who God is and His love for you and the love that He has shown you through His death and resurrection of His Son. And you start practicing how to live, that you trust Him by obeying His word even when it doesn't feel like, man, I'd rather do something else here. That you start trusting Him. And as you build and your spirit gets strengthened, that one day you will look back and see the opportunity when you are able to speak into somebody's life like that old man spoke into mine. That man he was dying. His body was dying, and he made an eternal difference in my life. Because his spirit was strong. But our decision starts now to become that person then. I pray we don't miss it.